made available to everyone in America. It would change the future of this nation.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stacey Abrams!
When I started running for governor, we anticipated that voter suppression was going to be instrumental in Brian Kemp's campaign, and we were right.
We've been in line for 5 hours.
They said, you've already voted. Looks like several days ago. No, I would have remembered that.
Thousands of people were told no and didn't have the authority to demand better.
These lines are insane. We had precinct consolidation, non-training of local election officials.
I knew something had gone horribly wrong. The system that is supposed to protect our democracy didn't work the way it was supposed to.
States implement voter suppression laws all across the country.
Things like new voter ID laws, purging. You're knocked off the rolls. Gerrymandering.
Changing the voting boundaries.
Ohio is a use it or lose it state.
In the United States, the right to vote is the only right you can lose simply for not using it.
Jim Crow 2.0, that's what we're saying. We've got a lot of work to do.
When we started as a country,
6% of people were eligible to vote. There are still forces that are determined to keep citizens from voting.
Unless we fight for the right to vote, our democracy is put at risk.
The fight over voting rights is ultimately about power.
The states have figured out how to stop African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, the young, and the poor from voting.
history is never a straight line. It's always a fight.
I will not concede because the erosion of our democracy is not right.
We try to make history.
The vote matters.
You belong. You have value.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Fred Blackwell. I'm the CEO at the San Francisco Foundation. It is really great to see so many familiar faces out there. Welcome, and really glad to see you for what we hope is going to be a really, well, what we know is going to be a really great conversation today about democracy and race. I'm going to say a couple of things to kind of get us started, and then really just dig into today's conversation. First, you know, as many of you all know, for several years now, the foundation has been on a journey to play whatever role that we can play in achieving a greater degree of racial equity and economic inclusion at a regional level of scale here in the Bay Area. And ever since adopting that North Star, we've been deploying a variety of tools in our tool belt to get there. Our grant making, our relationships, our leadership, and our relationship with all of you all as donors. And we think an important part of this journey is being able to engage you all in kind of what we're learning and what the opportunities are and what some of the kind of best thinking is that people are embarked on in various aspects of trying to achieve equity. Shortly after we adopted that North Star, we started thinking about kind of what the right strategies were in order to get us to a greater level of economic or racial equity and economic inclusion. And we did a lot of thinking about issues. We thought a lot about housing related stuff. We thought a lot about economic opportunity, and we were very clear that we thought that people in place played an important role in achieving equity and having strategies that were aligned with that. But we also came to the conclusion very early on that power was really critical to achieving racial equity in the Bay Area. And that power, meaning kind of making sure that the people most impacted by the issues that we were working on had the kind of political and civic voice in order to kind of demand the kind of changes that were necessary and participate effectively and fully in our democracy was a really important part of that. And so today's conversation is really about talking about that intersection of democracy and race. And it's really an outgrowth of what we have been doing at the foundation for a number of years now. This is the second in a whole series of salons that we are having with donors, where we're bringing our partners and thought leaders into the room with you to talk about and discuss important issues as it relates to racial justice and racial equity. And in our last meeting, we had a really stimulating conversation with Kamal Bell and Kimberly Aceves and Niguez to talk about the issue just generally of race and how we should be thinking about it and how folks are digging into the issue. And this is a continuation of that conversation. I want to introduce the speakers in a minute. You have some bios that I'm sure you saw kind of coming into this and that are in the chat, so I'm not going to read every aspect of it. And before I introduce them, I just kind of want to give you a little bit of a heads up that this is going to be an interactive session. And so we will have small groups, but we're also going to be asking you at various points along this salon to press buttons that will pop up in front of you. Some of those buttons will be beaming you into the small group discussions. Some of those buttons will be asking you to respond to polls that we're going to do on the spot so we can get a feel for kind of how the mood is in the room and how folks are thinking about issues. So I just wanted to say at the top to be looking out for various pop-ups that are coming up to ask you to engage with us. And now I want to do a little bit of a different introduction for our speakers. All three of them, Attorney General Eric Holder, Steve Phillips, Christina Livingston, all have extremely varied and deep backgrounds around the issues that we're going to talk about. But that's not how I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to tell you a few things that you may not know about each one of them. First, I'll start with Christina Livingston. She is a singer and has some very legit performance experiences under her belt, including singing the national anthem. And so you should know that about Christina. Former Attorney General Eric Holder grew up in Queens, but that's not it. He grew up in Queens, 4 blocks from Malcolm X, Willie Mays, Louis Armstrong, and Jackie Robinson, some amazing people. We hope that we think you're worthy of that neighborhood though, Eric Holder. That's right on there. But you should also know that in front of Malcolm X's house in 1964, he met Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali gave him an autograph on a small piece of paper, which he actually treasured until his mom accidentally threw it away. Steve Phillips, just kind of keeping with that theme, also has a lot of kind of interesting interactions. He has hosted President Obama at his home, and President Obama actually left behind a presidential cup, which Steve used to occasionally bring out and show off to people until the folks who come and clean his house actually threw that cup away. I don't know if they still work for you or not, Steve, but that's an interesting tidbit as well. So as you can see, these are very accomplished people, but they also have things that they've done outside of those accomplishments. So let me dig in. What I want to do is just do a little bit of a lightning round and just ask you to respond really quickly to the first question I'm going to ask, and that is kind of, what does this look like in practice? Like, what is your vision, and what is the vision that you have for a society, and what it might look like if everyone has a say in shaping the decisions that impact their lives and communities? And Attorney General, why don't I start with you? And then we'll go to you, Steve, and then Christina. And then I'll talk about our first kind of small group exercise. So Attorney General.
Well, thanks first off for having me. I think this is going to be a fun session. That was a painful trip down memory lane. I really treasured that autograph. I think that my vision for the country, I'm in kind of a negative space right now. And I think that actually, I think about what my vision would be by looking at what it is not now, where people are denied political rights, economic rights, treated unfairly in our criminal justice system, in our economic system. So, you know, that's kind of where we are and not where we need to be. We've made progress as a nation, but I think that, you know, my vision would be a nation where people have the political power that they should have, that people have the right to vote. It's made easy to vote, that we don't have systems of political oppression like gerrymandering. And so that if that political power is in the possession of the people, I think that a lot of what it is that we'd like to see in our society will flow from that. You know, a fair educational system, a more fair economic system. Certainly, the criminal justice system could look better. So that's, you know, I look just for fairness in our perfect society. And if we have that, I think you know, all positive things will flow from that.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about expanding our imaginations in terms of what's possible, and you know, to make it topical. I actually wound up writing something about. I've been playing with this concept, or not playing with this concept, trying to work through this framework that the Civil War never actually ended. That the South, the Confederacy, they've never conceded, and certainly up to the point of seeing all these monuments that they're protecting and all of that. But that ties into our social contract, our sense of governance around what should this country be and who should this country be for. And so I feel a lot of us are constrained by the sense that that war is over, we're all in this country together, we're all bound by a common set of rules and laws and norms. But if we're seeing anything play itself out in this country now, most immediately at this moment after, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing, is that this notion around we're all playing by the same rule and playing by a set of rules that have fairness and that have deference to the Constitution, that a president puts forward a Supreme Court justice, the Senate should act on it, right? That's not the set of rules that they're adhering to. And so we're seeing it again now in this whole situation. And so I keep thinking about what would be, it's almost like once we win the Civil War, what would be possible, right? And that there's so much that, and so that's what this whole, I did not know until Friday that the United States has changed the size of the Supreme Court 7 times in our history. And so we just take it as inviolate. Oh, the court's 9 people, and then we're stuck with this for the rest of our lives, et cetera. It's like, well, apparently not, right? And we actually, so I'm like, well, we could do that. What else could we do? And that's where I feel like this question around who is the country for gets in the way of what the public policy and the priorities could actually be. There's this book, was it Dying of Whiteness, right? Where he talks about, there's an example they have in there, this white guy in the South who was literally dying and said he would not go get health care, not avail himself of health care because it was Obamacare, and he would rather die, and he did. But on the other side of that, if we can get past that to then envision what a society is, we can have a society which has truly universal health care, which really all the components of the social contract, universal health care, nobody living in poverty, nobody living in on the streets and homelessness. All of that is possible in the richest country in the history of the world if there were the will and if there were the sense that we were actually all in this together trying to build one country together. So in terms of, I guess, my sense of what it is, this question around what might be possible once we envision that we're not restrained by those who don't feel that we're all in this together, and that can we build a majority which wants to provide for everybody, lift everyone up, empower everybody's potential.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for that. Christina, how about you? What could it look like?
You know, I just want to lift up that having an imagination is really critical to thinking about what it could look like. And imagination is something that begins to atrophy once we reach adulthood. And there aren't a lot of spaces where we get to imagine. So we did do an exercise with our members at ACE to really imagine what it could look like. And I just want to read for y'all what they came up with. And I just want to say these aren't my words. These are the words of the community members we work with. But if we can get to a place where we have representative democratic process and where we have redistribution of wealth and power and where we really have racial and gender equality, like we don't have to deal with equity anymore, we're actually at equality. What they believe that we could get to is a place where we all have our basic needs met at a minimum. And by that, they mean quality education, they mean healthy food, they mean affordable housing, they mean good healthcare, they mean a livable income. Basic needs, that's our bread. And then they want the roses, you know? They want control over their own bodies. They want to live without threat of harm from people or the environment. They want to live without harming the environment. They want to be free to pursue their relationships, their passions, and the outlets that really feed their need for self-actualization, for love, for belonging, without prejudice, without bias, and without oppression.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you for bringing the voices of your members into the conversation with us. What we're going to do now is pivot into some small group conversations. And what you just heard from our speakers, we want you to engage in that conversation with one another in the small groups that we put together, in addition to introducing yourselves. We think that a really important part of these conversations is for you to hear from the kinds of folks that you're hearing from today, but also to be in dialogue with one another about these issues. And so we're going to go into small groups, and in the small groups, what we're going to ask you to do is introduce yourselves, but also dig into this question around what is your vision for what the community can look like, for what society can look like if people are really able to fully engage and exercise their kind of full political power and democratic rights. And so this is the first test of the technology. We're going to put the buttons up in front of you. If you press join a breakout room, you will be beamed into another room and have your small group conversations. I think I'm muted. I was saying welcome back to the Starship Enterprise. It's great to see everyone back in one piece. First of all, thank you for indulging us in that introduction. We think is really important, not only for us to kind of be engaged with the panelists, but to be engaged with one another. I'm going to test the technology again and ask you to respond to a poll. You know, we have all been exposed to the classic paradox around the chicken and the egg, around kind of what comes first in kind of the examining of the relationship of cause and effect. And similar to that quandary, what we want you to do is respond to this first question. What will have to come first, a healthy democracy or a racially just society? The poll will pop up in a second. We'll ask you to respond. You've got about 30 seconds to give a thoughtful response. So it looks like most people feel like both have to happen simultaneously. And then we got an equal number of people who either think that the healthy democracy has to come first or the racially just society needs to come first. So thank you on that. And let me turn it over to the panelists. And I'll start again with you, Mr. Attorney General. What needs to come first? Does either one, or does it all need to happen at once? You're on mute.
Well, I tend to think that they move in tandem. You know, I spent a significant amount of my time since leaving the Obama administration on dealing with this whole question of gerrymandering. And that's a question of, you know, of basic fairness and power distribution, you know, ensuring that our maps are drawn in a way that allows people to get to choose their representatives instead of, you know, politicians choosing who their voters are going to be. And I think a big problem with gerrymandering is that it so often is done on the basis of race. You see cracking and packing of voters based on, what they look like in a way that dilutes the voting power of Black and brown Americans. Many of our the most gerrymandered state legislatures engage in some of the most discriminatory voting practices, voter ID laws and things like that. So I think the answer to the question, is that they move together. I think we need to have a racially just society to have a healthy democracy, but I don't think we can ever have a healthy democracy until we deal with the problem of racial justice. I think, we were a racially unjust society when we came into being. 1619, America became racially unjust at that time. We become a nation, 1776. And so that has been a part of our DNA for as long as we have called ourselves, a nation. And so I think, as I said, that we're going to have to deal, with both. I think this nation would have been fundamentally different had we not started off as racially unjust, but we started there. And so I think it's going to take both, a movement with regard to both to get us to the place where we ought to be.
And Steve, I think some would say that you literally wrote the book on this issue. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, let me just first say, just to preface and to finish from our small group as well, is I think everybody's feeling a lot of depression in terms of this moment in time. So let me say, in a nonpartisan but data-driven reflection, that the current President of the United States does not enjoy majority support of the American people, has never enjoyed majority support, did not get elected with majority support, did not get elected with majority support in the states that gave him the Electoral College. And all of the electoral evidence and the data empirical evidence has showed a decrease in the support that he even had in 2016. And that in these different elections that have taken place, the different polls, meaningful numbers, particularly of college-educated whites, have receded from that. So just from an analytical standpoint, in terms of, because somebody was raising the point around the salience of white supremacy within this country, it has never had a champion the way, or certainly in 100 years or so, the way that it currently does. But quantitatively, that's not the majority of people. And that I just think that it's important for us to hold that. People look at these different polling numbers, they say, like, we don't believe them. But all of the empirical evidence we have is that this agenda, this type of leadership, is not supported by the majority of people. So I want to have people try to hold to that. So this question about which comes first, I feel like one of the greatest case studies and examples of this is what has happened in Virginia over the past 10 years. And that Virginia has gone from, well, being the first state they brought Black people to in 1619, but over the past 10 years, as Virginia has changed the composition of its electorate, and as it has become more diverse and more reflective of the multiracial composition of the state and of the country, they have then been able to reorder their public policies and their priorities in ways that benefit lots of people and expand social justice, economic justice, and racial justice. So they've been able to extend Medicaid and healthcare insurance to 400,000 people. They've been able to raise the minimum wage for, I believe it's 1 million people who are going to benefit from that from this year. They've been able to make democracy and voting much easier. They've been able to, in terms of the Civil War not being over, been able to finally take down these Civil War monuments, all because they have moved in tandem around the democracy component, has strengthened and reflected the racial composition and the racial changes. So I think they need to go together, if not exactly in tandem, certainly iterative. And so for people to feel it's relevant to vote and keep voting, they need to see that there's a consequence and a benefit for their lives. So if you vote and then you get health care as a low-income person, that makes you more motivated to keep voting. So I think things work in an iterative fashion in that way, certainly connected, if not exactly parallel.
And Christina, I mean, ACE clearly, and through your work directly and your work with the Million Voters Project, has been kind of on the ground working with folks who are working on this issue. How does it manifest, and how does this kind chicken and egg question manifest for you all at ACE and inside the work that you're engaged in?
So I really agree that the original sin of the country is that we started off with such a racially unjust society, and that's not just about slavery, it's about the murder of Native people, and erasing over time, not just in history, but today, erasing the legacy of Native people, dehumanizing of Black people, the othering of Latinx and migrant folks. And it didn't have to be chicken and egg is what I think I'm trying to say, right? We could have started with acknowledging and respecting and holding, valuing our racial diversity and built a healthy democracy on top of it. However, we are where we are, so we don't get to start over. And the truth is, I really agree. They go hand in hand. And so what it really is, the precursor for me and for my work at ACE and for our work at MVP is really building the base of mobilizable, racially diverse, active folks who are ready, crystal clear about building power for the purpose of creating both a healthy democracy and a racially just society. So there is a whatever comes before chicken or egg. There's a pre-thing, there's a God thing, which is really about building power amongst the base of people here in California. And I think a lot about where we are right now. Prop 15 is on the ballot. It is about undoing a really racially reactive policy, structural policy that's on the books today that keeps money from flowing into Black and brown communities. And the reason Prop 13 came into play in California is that California was becoming less and less white. This was a reactive policy. And the reason today that we are able to have this initiative on the ballot is both because we've got a much more racially diverse California that's clear about political power, and because we've got formations like the Million Voters Project that has been working for the last 10 years to build the base of 1 million voters who are catalyzed around these issues and who are ready to take action, ready to strike. So I want to underscore that below all of this and above all of this and around all of this is the organizing, the slow and steady organizing work that not only can move policy, but that can create the political landscape to make policies realizable. Because as I think Anthony Thigpen may have coined this, although I'm not 100% sure, demographics are not destiny. Just because we are, a diverse state does not mean that we will have actually a reflective democracy unless we really work for it.
With all three of your responses, I hear a few common themes. One is that we got off on the wrong foot when it comes to this intersection between the two. Another is that they actually do travel together and one doesn't actually manifest or happen without the other. But I also hear all three of you all hinting at the fact that the reinforcement of the kind of lack of racial justice as we think about our democracy has prevented things from happening. And that there actually have been consequences associated with that are negative for the country and for society. I guess the question I would have as a follow-up is so what have we missed out on by not having racial justice embedded in our kind of democratic or our frame around democracy?
Well, in some ways, you never know what it is we didn't get. I mean, what unbelievably talented African-American man or woman could have done something great given the chance, cured disease, created great art. Who knows? It's just not racial stuff, and we're talking about, but you think about all the gender discrimination that has been a part of this nation for far too long. I mean, lives that were constricted, roles that were also restricted. We've not had the full benefit of the creativity of our people, the industriousness of our people. And so, yeah, this nation has done extremely well, but I dare say that without these issues, we would have done even better, and we would have certainly been in a better place now than we are. I mean, because now with all of these distinctions that we have for too long followed, there are power dynamics that surround these now, and it's one group against the other. As demographic changes are taking place in this nation, it becomes tribal, almost. And so it's not only a question of what it is we've lost, it's also a question of how going forward this is going to be a negative, it's going to be a drag on this nation going forward. I mean, this coming diversity, or this diversity that we're in, should be a source of great energy, a way in which this nation can build itself in the 21st century. And yet we see what's happening. It's being used as a divisive thing. And I think it will retard the progress that this nation otherwise might have.
Yeah, I think the point that Attorney General is making around the arts is something that we don't appreciate very much, right? Is that there's so much, and when we see this, flowering of people, I had one time researched around Cookie from Empire, right, Natasha, and that it was like she came onto the scene, and then I was like, but she'd been there all along, right? For 15 years, I think she was art student number 2 in the show Felicity, right? And so she had been there, but never had the opportunity in terms of, so just a lot within the arts, I think. And I would actually venture that the entire progressive public policy agenda pretty much is hindered by this. In fact, somebody was saying they don't, in terms of voting rights stuff, nobody has any issues with their voting situation. They don't want somebody else to have this benefit. And it's really this notion about we don't want somebody else to benefit, right? And there's I'm friends with the Michael Tubbs, mayor of Stockton, talking about universal basic income. They had this poll, and there's a strong racial disparity in polling around, do people support universal basic income? And I was saying to myself, I wonder what it would be like if you were to poll, are you for basic income so long as it doesn't go to Black people, right? And so there is this notion of resistance to progressive policies because it'll go to those people. And most immediately and dramatically now, we're seeing it in the coronavirus, right? It's just those people. Therefore, we don't care. And so that I would submit as one of the primary obstacles to the entire public policy agenda, this concept that we don't want to do something for that grouping of people. And that, I think, is holding back a whole range of things.
Thank you, Steve. Christina, you want to dive in on that one? Sure.
I actually think maybe I'll build a little bit off of the last point that Steve made about not wanting to have people benefit off of, I think there is this real belief that, there are people who are trying all the time to game and take advantage of the system, and they are unworthy and undeserving. And that does make it very difficult for us to move a policy agenda that is good for people. But on top of that, I think there are so many ways in which a racially unjust society keeps us from being able to express, what we truly want and what we truly need. There are lots of ways in which, those people are actually also saying, like, I'm in a particular level of privilege and I scrapped and fought my way to get there, and I don't want to slide back. And I'm worried that if I leave the door open too wide behind me, I'm going to get sucked back there. There's not a lot of permanence for us if we're moving our way up the ladder. It all feels slippery. It's all oily. So there's a way in which we're actually, all of the marginalized groups have to struggle with that within our own communities. What I feel like is really difficult is there are lots of ways that we are taught to sort of hold ourselves back, right, from having our real conversations with ourselves and real conversations with one another because the layer of racism stands in the way. We're worried about offending, or we're worried about not being understood, or worried about not being heard, or, I feel like I was taught all the time, you have to be twice as good to get half as far, and therefore, I'm like worried about being perfect, and I've got, these like imposter syndromes that take over me. And there are all of these ways that, I know that I could be much more powerful if I could get that out of the way. And I know that that's probably true for everyone. There are ways in which adopting whiteness holds people back. There are ways in which, us trying to assimilate is holding us back, or us trying to be like free of that is hard for people to hold. So I just feel like it permeates really every way that we as individuals and we as a society see each other, talk to one another, think with one another. But that is not to say that there's no, it is a big, like, it's a big elephant in the room, but it's not to say there's no way around the elephant, right? That we can't clear the elephant of the room. I think it means we have to really dig deep and get honest. And I think it means we have to talk clearly about how what we are moving toward attacks this issue and doesn't try to skirt around it, and for what benefit, you know, that vision we were talking about before, how is that a vision that's big enough to hold all of us?
Thank you. We're a little bit ahead of time, but I'm going to keep powering through so that we can get to some really great questions that are coming up in the chat. One of which, Steve, I think you saw a lot of interest in your 4 states, 12 counties stuff. So we may give you a little bit of a time to talk about that, but I think we'll also make sure that we send the materials that you have around that out to the group. The next question that we want to pose to the group in the poll is, what are the 1 or 2 problems with our democratic system right now that you're most worried about? You're about to get a list, and we want you to pick 1 or 2 of them. What are the 1 or 2 problems that you're most concerned about when it comes to our democratic system? So we've got some interesting results here. I'll stick with them for a little bit. Structural issues, gerrymandering, money in politics, disinformation, partisan media, foreign interference. We got a lot of problems, y'all. Christina, let me start with you. What are you working on right now that you think is really important with regard to these issues? And why do you think it's so important for you to work on these issues that you're working on?
A couple things. So through the MVP programming, we decided to take on a very robust public education campaign that we are calling Rep CA, Rep California. And our goal is really to decrease cynicism about civic participation, to get some sort of issue support, and to deepen our strategic infrastructure between our organizations. And the reason why, you know, for us, this decreasing of cynicism and apathy is so critical is because from our perspective, there's winning the right to vote, right? The actual protections, the enfranchisement of voting. There's having the means to vote, you know, having access to voting, understanding voting, having voting in your language, that kind of thing. And then there's the desire to vote. And I think in so many ways, our folks are being asked to make choices that they don't believe in, that they're not excited about. And some of that lack of excitement comes from, you know, years and years of a public narrative that says you can't trust government. Government is not good for you. It will not work on your behalf. Again, that has some real racial underpinnings to it. And that, in fact, your vote doesn't count. And so if we can't get people excited about the desire to vote, no matter if we've got all of the structural things in place, no matter if everybody's got access, we're still gonna have so many folks who are not showing up. And those are our folks. These are the racial justice, you know, these are the folks that have been left out all along. So within, in a totally sort of C3 way, that's not about getting into the muck of, you know, what are the policies and who are the candidates and what is the district. That just really is about the vision and the future and the reality of what taking power really means and what using power really means, and not being afraid of power and understanding how it's important for our communities is just so critical. So this, you know, this sort of public narrative work is big for us as a collective. And then on the ACE side, the issue that I would have chosen had I participated in the poll was around money in politics, which connects very closely to sort of disinformation and misinformation. You know, there are just a couple of really big players in California who are, you know, putting lots of money into our systems. They're putting in money at the legislative level. They're putting in money at the ballot. They're putting in money locally, statewide. They're putting in money everywhere. And in some ways, it's very hard to find a policy that hasn't been influenced or a representative that hasn't been influenced by this money. And so it's a combination of the exposure of what this money is doing and what is the agenda that it's paying for, but also sort of saying, this is a way in which we are being restricted, our access. We don't have the same access by virtue of not being part of this big industry or having, you know, the level of money that others who are playing in this space do. And our folks find that to be extremely repressive and makes it hard for them to feel like anything that they do is sort of going to make any difference. So it goes hand in hand with that desire to vote piece.
Thank you. And I was notified that you couldn't see the result on voter suppression. That was 42%, by the way. Steve, what are you working on? Why is it important?
So kind of picking up on what Christina was saying, and then also this piece around the analysis that we sent out. So we got started looking at analysis when all these attacks came down in the post office. And it's like the level of things you didn't think were possible in this country, right? In terms of like, oh, you're actually going to stop the mail from happening. So tied back to something I was saying about this effort to, if one does not have majority support, to deny participation. And there's like $100 million of lawsuits that are being brought to oppose any effort to make it easier to vote. Drop boxes? No, we're going to sue against that. Absentee ballots? No, we're going to sue against that. So we started looking at how do you fend off these attacks on the franchise, on the basic democratic process. And so we found a few things that led to this set of recommendations. I don't bury the lead. We did put out through Salem Phillips Center a set of recommendations that are C3 and C4 around how, fundamentally around how to maximize participation and to combat these attacks. And we landed on 12 counties in 4 states. And that's for a couple of reasons. Is that there's been a lot of good work done. The Partnership for Safe Voting, Open Society Foundation, Omidyar had laid a lot of groundwork with counties. And so you may have hostile state governors and secretaries of state, but elections take place in counties, and people of color in particular are concentrated in counties. And so if you can find those counties and find counties where you have pro-democracy elected officials or local officials, that's a way to fend off the attacks. And so one county in particular that's probably most illustrative is Maricopa County in Arizona. 2/3 of all of the votes in Arizona come from Maricopa County. And you've got a very pro-voting election administration system and a very highly organized absentee voting system. So if you can protect Maricopa, you can fend off attacks on voting in Arizona, on the franchise in Arizona overall. And so then we began to look at where else is that the case. So we settled and made a set of recommendations that are Arizona, Georgia, Florida, and Pennsylvania, and then the key counties within those areas. Most of the election administration stuff itself is covered now. Well, it was already being covered, and then Zuckerberg came in with $300 million, so I hope it's covered now. But the remaining work is a lot of stuff that kind of Christina was talking about. It's very labor-intensive, person-to-person work to help people surmount the obstacles that stand in their way. And so to do that, you need community-based organizations that have trust, that have credibility, that have the expertise to be able to help people overcome the obstacles and get them to vote. And so that's the set of recommendations that we had put together and we can share with people, but it's those 4 states, those 12 counties, and then a key group within those counties who is doing this voter turnout work. There's a group called CASE in Arizona, New Georgia Project in Georgia, New Florida Majority, One Pennsylvania in Pennsylvania. And so we feel that those are all key. And also, frankly, there's a time zone issue. And so is the election going to be accurately reflective of the results early enough in the night so that you can't have further disinformation? And so that was also part of our calculation as well. in terms of the strategic investment and focus for people. So that's one of the main things that we're focusing on right now.
Thank you. Attorney General.
Yeah, well, I'm now the chair of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. We have a number of affiliates, and what the work I'm doing is to end gerrymandering, and that's really about trying to restore fairness to our, our electoral systems. It was interesting as Steve was describing Virginia. Well, all the positive things that he was talking about in Virginia, as he said, come as a result of political reform. First off, you have people voting in numbers that are substantial. You remove unnecessary barriers, and then especially you do away with gerrymandering, and you don't have Republicans in control to a degree that was not consistent with the votes that they got. So we had a Democratic governor, a Democratic legislature, and then suddenly all things happened, including the expansion of Medicaid. And that's all about fairness. That's what we're trying to do at the NDRC, to try to restore fairness to our electoral system. We've pushed for a number of reforms in the states to create these independent, nonpartisan redistricting commissions as you have in California. And I think that's the best way to do the line drawing, the reapportionment that's going to happen next year. Don't let politicians draw the lines. Have an independent body do it. And I think gerrymandering is really just one of the small d democratic issues that we're dealing with as a country right now. There's been, over the past decade, an assault on the right to vote. I mean, gerrymandering, voter purges, unnecessary photo ID laws, and on the top of, unjust electoral college, a Senate that skews towards rural, wider states. I think we're at an inflection point for our country. I mean, I know this is a nonpartisan event, but I'll just say that I'm concerned about the long-term health of our democracy. I think there's been a silver lining to the past few years. There's been a reawakening of American citizenship. The Women's March, kids from Parkland, who led the March for Our Lives for sane gun laws, and more recently the coalition of people that we've seen, around the death of George Floyd. So I think we have to sustain that level of engagement, that level of civic interest, fight for these political, these systemic political changes that I think are absolutely necessary. And then it just, it's interesting because I don't think of them as trying to gain partisan advantage. I'm just fighting for fairness, confident that if the system is fair, Democrats will do fine, progressives will do just fine, and the will of the people will actually be expressed in ways that that is now prevented from happening. So I hope that the work that I'm doing will be consequential. I think we, as a nation, we have a moment right now. This George Floyd killing has given us a moment, along with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. It's given us a moment. Now the question is, what do we do with this moment? Can we convert this moment into a movement and into permanent, consequential things? I mean, people don't understand that marching is just a tactic. That's not an end in itself. It's important, but it's a tactic. And the question is, what are we going to use from these successful tactics? What are we going to glean from these successful tactics? And so what I'm trying to do is focus on on political fairness.
Thank you. I'm sure I'm not speaking just for myself when I say it's encouraging to hear all three of you talk about the work that you're doing and your passion around it and why it's so important. And we actually feel like we need that in some of these moments. I mean, we're in a room of folks who are engaged in philanthropy, and I have to say that there are a few exceptions, but when folks think about philanthropy, the first place that they go in their mind is not necessarily about its intersection with democracy. What would your advice be, or your words be, to folks who are engaged in philanthropy around where the intersections are for their work might be with the issues that we're talking about right now? Anybody?
I'll jump in with a couple of things real quick. Is that I think the way you framed it up, Fred, is on point. And I'm not, quick example in terms of my own experience, in terms of how it translates. And so Eric talked about this being this moment and George Floyd and all this changing and feeling about racial justice in the country. So I was working with folks at the Center for American Progress and other nonprofit groups around HR 40, the bill to establish a commission that would look at the question of reparations. What is owed to Black people? And I said, well, now we have this moment, there's all this, and so they were saying, well, we need to get a poll that shows that there's support for it. So we went out and got a poll, brought that to the committee staff, still could not get this bill out of a Democratic controlled committee. What that it showed me, and I thought I knew this lesson, but apparently I didn't, is that fundamentally, it's not about persuasion, and it's not about information and better, more quality information being what moves the public policy ball. It's about pressure and power. And that clearly they felt that the consequences of moving forward were worse than the consequences of doing nothing on that. And so that, I think, is kind of so it's like really reminded me of this message around how do we manifest the power of those communities and groups which are most impacted by society's inequality. And that is the work that needs to move forward. And so I would really my recommendation is to invest in the leaders and the groups who are lifting up those concerns. And that's what we saw. It's like all of the awakening in June of this year, nothing this was new to Black people. It's like this has been our life experience for our entire lives, but only now other people were becoming aware of it. So when the people who live this reality are empowered and staffed and able to bring those concerns and that urgency into halls of power, that's when we get change. And that's something I think that everybody in philanthropy can do, is to support those groups, those individuals, those leaders, so they have the resources so that those voices are continually present in the places that matter.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I'd build off what Steve says. I would think that looking at those intersections, you can't divorce, I think, effective philanthropy from governmental political structures. Otherwise, I think you're playing on the margins. Now, I know your C3s, C4s, and you got to be careful about ways in which you do that. But then I think you need to look for those groups, those leaders who are having, trying to affect change in both of those spheres, the non-political and the political. It doesn't mean you have to get into electoral politics. I divorce maybe political from electoral in that sense. But I think at the end of the day, we keep hearing this word, and I was saying this in our small group, it's about power. It's about the acquisition and use of power. And progressives, we for too long have been uncomfortable with saying those kinds of things, saying, talking about acquiring power, and using power. And the reality is that those people less concerned about fairness, less concerned about justice, have had no problems, no problems talking about and acquiring power. Doesn't mean that we do inappropriate things or betray, who we are or the movements that we lead. But I think we need be a little more frank, a little more comfortable with saying stuff like that. I need power. We need power, and we need to use that power in appropriate ways. And so, as you're trying to make philanthropic decisions, which organizations are going to help acquire that power, and then obviously use that power in appropriate ways. But how can you accumulate the necessary power to bring about the society that you envision?
Thank you. Christina?
It's for so long, we're a statewide organization, so we also get funding by a group foundation down in LA, and they always say change, not charity. And I think there are some ways that people in philanthropy think of their giving as charity, as a way of mitigating, harm, as a way of, helping folks who have less. But I think more and more, my guess, I don't know all of you, But my guess, since you are connected to the San Francisco Foundation, is that you all are actually clear that it's not just about charity, that this is really about moving an agenda, and an agenda that's about economic and racial justice. And because of that, we really do have to get clear about how giving money to groups who are doing the long-term organizing and base building is what makes those major electoral and policy wins possible. It's the seed work, right? That shifts the landscape, where the upsurges and where the crises happen, and where we can actually, if we do our job correctly and if we are ready for it, take the energy that's in the street, get real comfortable and understand what is like the gut sense of the people in the streets and what they're calling for, and translate that into policy that can be, formalized and embraced moving forward. And it's not only that the organizing is the seed work, it's also where the language is created, where the political imagination for what is possible is created. And so the democracy that I'm speaking of is not just the democracy that's about who are the representatives and who gets to vote, but also the democracy in terms of who's deciding what gets to be voted on, whose voice is informing what those choices are in our local governments, in our neighborhoods, at every level that people are actually interacting, and organizing allows us to do that at every level.
Thank you. Just one other thought here. And I'm channeling some of the questions that I'm seeing coming across the chat as well. We've been doing some planning at the foundation around our work, and we kind of have Election Day in November circled, and there's a lot of anxiety about kind of what it's going to be like leading up to it. But there's also more anxiety than I've ever experienced before around what's going to happen the day after. What should we be thinking about in terms of the day after? What is it that we need to be thinking about, concerned about in terms of our democracy and the results of the election?
Well, I think one thing is to set expectations. I had even forgotten, it was just in 2000, we didn't know who won the election for 4 weeks, right? So it's not without precedent that there would be a process and a delay. And so I think that's one thing, is to in terms of the setting the expectations can help to a certain extent. So that, I guess that's one of the main things that I wanted to offer.
Yeah, you were talking about the day after the election. I think we got to steel people for the night of the election, because we're so used to exit polls and all of these things. And this is, Steve's point is a really good one. 2000, Bush versus Gore, we didn't know for, any number of weeks until, Supreme Court made that disastrous ruling about, what was going to happen. And we need to sensitize people so that if somebody tries to claim on the basis of returns that day, not counting mail-in ballots or something like that in certain states, that there is a victory, and then tries to somehow delegitimize the counting of mailed-in ballots, that falls on ears that have been sensitized to that. Remember what happened in 2000, and you look through much of American history, elections weren't decided on the night of the election. You couldn't, before we had, I guess, telegraphs and TVs and radios and all of that stuff. And this nation's strong enough to endure. We can handle, a few days before we know who the winner is. Though I suspect, I'm not sure it's going to really take that long. But I think we need to be prepared, for that possibility.
The thing about the day after election is that California counts again. We matter again, right? As soon as the election is over, California resumes the role of being a state that is leading the nation in what we want to see in terms of racial and economic justice. Now, whether we do a bad job or a good job is up to us and our work in organizing, but people see that. They say, as you know, if as goes California, so goes the nation. We did it 30 years ago, whatever all of the, you know, things that people say about California are. And it's important for us to remember, or at least for me and my work to remember, that, you know, election aside, California is in a really precarious position right now. We've got a housing crisis, we've got a homelessness crisis, we've got an unemployment crisis, we have a crisis of legitimacy in terms of who is representing us and how they are responding, stepping up to this moment. We've got a real need to get revenue into our, you know, local and statewide coffers. And there's a way in which the day after election, we need to be out there saying, in one way or another, what is the agenda that California is going to move forward that will help move the rest of the nation forward? So I just want to say that, particularly for you all on this call, the giving to California, the giving to the organizing groups is critical. And there's a lot of ways, depending on, you know, the next few days after the election, that our folks might actually find themselves in a great amount of fear and or danger that we'll have to respond to while we're trying to move forward. You know, what is the policy agenda? How are we moving, you know, how are we moving ourselves down the line? How are we also protecting people from what might be coming, depending on what the results are? So there is just a ton of work to do. And I want to just say to folks, you know, I was just a couple days ago on a call with some folks who are on this call with organizing groups who were saying, you know, we actually should think about giving now. That sets us up for what we have to do right after the election, because of the delays are what makes the damage, you know, more deep and harder to reverse if we're not ready for them.
Yeah, great point. And maybe I'll ask this question and then we'll have to close it out, and I want to hand it over. Christina, you're just reminding me that democracy and how we engage in its intersections with racial justice isn't just about elections, it's also about governance. Maybe close out for us, maybe if you all have ideas around kind of what does engagement need to look like in order for effective governance at any level?
All right, well, I'll go first then, I guess. You know, I say this very frequently, but, you know, Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. But the reality, it doesn't bend on its own. You know, it only bends when concerned people, like on this screen, and others put their hands on that arc and pull it towards justice. You know, positive change is not promised, doesn't happen. It just happens because, you know, people sacrifice, commit themselves to make it happen. And so I think, you know, finding ways to support those people and those organizations who, through their track record, have shown an ability to foment change, but then also, you know, newer people, newer folks on the scene, and newer organizations that you have some basis to believe are going to, you know, bring about needed change. They're worthy of support too. And, you know, in all of the decisions that you make, I would urge you sometimes to get a little outside of your comfort zones. You know, not every decision is going to be one that will result in the, you know, result that you'd like. Some efforts are going to fail, but some, you know, some will not. And so we need a multiplicity of efforts to try to get to the place where we need to be. This is a time, we have a moment, as I was saying before, and I think we need to meet that moment by doing, you know, the expected, but also doing, you know, the unconventional. And so I would urge all of us to, you know, to be as focused as we can be prepared to sacrifice, be as tough, you know, as we need to be, and be, you know, be comfortable with stating this in the raw way that I said before about acquiring power for, you know, for positive reasons. I mean, if we do all those things, that is the way in which we bend that arc.
Thank you. Steve, it looked like you wanted to weigh in there.
Yeah, I would just add, I think an additional element to it is, essentially you opened up with Stacey Abrams, right? So, my wife Susan and I were very early supporters of Stacey back in 2012. And so we were just looking, when she started the New Georgia Project, we gave one of the first like $15,000 grants. But more importantly, we tried to do whatever we could in terms of opening up doors to her and lending whatever level of credibility and stature we had to the efforts of this, Black woman from Georgia that nobody really knew. And so, and we've seen what Casey's gone and who she's become, and she's obviously not done yet. So I think the piece of what I take from that is, from our experiences, is that in addition to the philanthropy that people do, is to think about really the social and cultural capital that we have, particularly those of us who are in the donor space, and how can we use that and confer that upon very particular, promising, dedicated leaders who may not have that validation. And so that's some of the most rewarding work that we have done. Let me look at Jessica Bird, when she was just getting started as an organizer and as an activist, like 5 years ago, who's now, one of the main leaders in this Black Lives Matter, this National Black Convention, putting forward a national 21st Century Civil Rights Act. People like Maurice Mitchell, both Working Families Party, Working Families Organization, Pablo Rodriguez down at Communities for New California. Christina, right? These are the individuals who we can help in additional ways to have them get the level of attention, credibility, prestige, access that are component parts of successful organizations. And so that would be my recommendations. In addition to the work we're doing to give grants to these groups, let's lay hands on the individuals who we think will lead us forward and confer to them the momentum, legitimacy, credibility that we can. And that, I think, will pay even outsized rewards.
Thank you. Judith, I know we've got a call to action from you, but I want to make sure we get Christina an opportunity to answer this question if she wants.
I won't be long-winded, but the one thing I want to say is, for me, like I did at the beginning of this meeting, I really bring the folks that I am working on behalf of into whatever room I'm in, and I am advocating for them all along. And there is a way in which every level further away from that person you are, the less likely you feel a responsibility to that person, and the less hard you fight, the less you're willing to, put your political capital, your personal capital on the line, the less comfortable you are with, risk or creative actions. So I just want to say, if you have ways to connect with the individuals or groups that can put individuals sort of in a room with you to really share their story, and that you can hold on and know that that's who you're fighting for, I think that activates a level of commitment and responsibility that allows you to take those tough risks with a little bit more fervor.
Thank you. Judith. It's a good segue to a call to action, I think.
It is. Thank you, Fred, and thank you to Attorney General Holder, Steve, and Christina. Really inspiring. And I do want to issue this call to action, and I want to start by giving people a little bit of detail about the Million Voters Project, because it is so emblematic of what folks have been talking about today, really starting with the fact that, California, as Christina said, is at a precarious place, but it's also at a pivotal place, and it's a pivotal place for the country. And we have this ballot this year that is a racial justice ballot, and we have this opportunity to speak to the nation about how we want the future to be, where we want our dollars to go, how we want to support our communities and schools. And so the Million Voters Project represents this coalition of groups connected and led by communities of color. It's Christina's organization, ACE, it's California Calls, it's PICO, it's Power California, it's the Coalition for Human and Immigrant Rights, it's other organizations as well. And they, the reason they got together, they did a power analysis, and really what they identified was, with 1 million voters activated, with 1 million voters activated, it would change the future of the state. And they've used data, and they've used engagement, and they've done research, and they have been connected to community. And so this year, they have basically a $250,000 gap that we're hoping that today we can close. They have a plan that they have already activated to connect with 1.5 million voters in the state. They know how many times they need to connect with them, right? More than at least 28 times in different ways. And they have trained more than 1,000 volunteers and staff to do that individual outreach. And so, today, one of the things we want to encourage people to do is to give to the Million Voters Project. It has been, more than 10 years of investment in these groups, in these leaders, in communities of color, people like Christina, who are really leading the charge for the future of the state. We've got a gift guide that both talks about MVP and also talks about individual organizations in communities across our region for folks to give to. I want to say one last thing about this notion of connecting to community. And it's actually also about the Million Voters Project. And in my small group, people were talking about how they were feeling depressed and sad and how hard this moment is. And I have to say, I've been feeling that too, despite the fact that I get to spend every day, working to advance this work. And the way that I have over and over now been feeling better is I've actually been volunteering with MVP and doing phone calls to individual voters. And it's that engagement I've actually been doing with my family. I encourage people to do it because it actually has been that engagement in conversation with individuals in community that has given me hope to be talking about key issues. I've done a lot of calling action around Prop 15, Schools and Communities First, and getting this sense of, we're in this together. And we have this possibility now of making this election be a moment for history, be when, as Attorney General Holder said, where we are working hard to bend the arc of justice. And so each of us, has so much we can do. And I just want to encourage people to give and to act.
Thank you for that, Judith. And I think it's a great way for us to ask the panelists to close out. I mean, we've got the gift guide. She just talked about the gap with the Million Voter Project. But for Attorney General Holder, Steve Phillips, and Christina Livingston, beyond giving, what's your call to action for people today, this week, this month, as it relates to this issue?
Well, I would say that this is not a time for despair. This is a time for action. And we're all feeling a little down, bothered obviously by the death of a great justice, and certainly bothered by what we see playing out now, and a whole range of other things. But this nation has seen tough times before. People of color have seen tough times before. Women have seen tough times before, and we get through them. And so I am optimistic that with a focused effort, and with all people pulling together, with groups like you, organizations like the ones you represent, people like you pulling together, that we can get to we can still get to the place where we want to be. It might seem that this is as bad as it can get, and maybe these are consequential times. No question about that. But I'm really optimistic about where we can get. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen simply because we wish it to be so. It'll only happen as a result of the work that we put in and the support that we all give. So I look forward to interacting with you all, down the road. But let's all be committed to making the positive change that we want. Let's make sure that that it happens. Again, I think we can do this.
Thank you, Christina.
I want to just follow a little bit of what Judith was saying. We have got an amazing ballot, and social justice, racial justice is on the ballot in California, and getting it on the ballot was a big deal. It may not win if we don't really put in the work to make it happen. So I just really encourage, we have gotten really smart about helping people from their homes, make these calls, do the text messages, have a little virtual party with us. I guess the point is, we may not win this if we don't all put in the work behind it. So please, reach out, volunteer. I'm happy to put you into our volunteer days. But, you know, overturning Prop 13 and enfranchising folks that are on parole and expanding the vote to youth, like there are just some really fantastic things. So go out, help us make calls, proselytize about them. Yeah, let's take some action on that.
All right, and Steve.
I guess I would just leave two specific things. One is this, the earlier point I was saying is, let's just say one person who you, and I would certainly say person of color, and I'd probably say woman of color, that you're going to invest in. So I think we do grants to groups, but on top of that, take a real interest in the totality of their career trajectory, their lives, the things that they're actually grappling with, have coffee with them, right, to see what they're actually dealing with. There are ways we can be helpful that are broader than just a grant to an organization. And so I think that I really want to emphasize that point about, I think we each took responsibility for one person that we're really going to try to invest in and try to help them be able to maximize their potential and impact in the world. So that I think was probably my most important piece. And then the second, I just put this in the chat, I think we should all be popularizing the concept of expanding the Supreme Court. It should not be a crazy, radical, out-of-the-box idea that's somehow destroying our democracy. It's something that's just very appropriate at this point in time, particularly given how the court has been, the unconstitutional nature by which the prior president's nominee was treated, and then the way that the hypocrisy we're seeing now. So the more we can make that a normal, non-crazy, non-radical idea, I think that's a benefit, and particularly at this point in time. And I think we should really be promoting that it is not a radical crazy and it's not a hard thing. That's the particular thing. If there is a majority in the Congress next year and a president willing to sign a bill, we can expand the court. And let's make that as common and popular as we can in the coming weeks.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. And let me just say thank you to Attorney General Holder. Thank you to Christina for your wisdom and your inspiration this afternoon. We really appreciate you being with us, and thank you to everybody who has dialed in today and spent the hour and a half with us on this really important topic. More to come. Thanks again. Have a great rest of the afternoon. Appreciate it.